Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Abby Green. If you know me, you know that things have a tendency to live in my head rent-free, and this Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation is no exception. As a female and a big believer in women's rights and that sort of thing, it is my instinct to believe the woman over the man all the time, 100% of the time, because the patriarchy exists and men's word are seriously, historically taken more seriously than what the woman says, and women are often told to like shush and let the man do whatever he wants. But the Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation is the first time that I've kind of had to look at that, and I think the opposite of how I would usually think. I don't believe her, and I believe him, and it seems like much of the internet is with me. The evidence against her versus the evidence against him, I think, is just astounding. And I wanted to do a video going through the case, but I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not really smart enough to sort of figure all that out. So instead, I invited criminal lawyer Ari Goldkind, who was fantastic and so sweet, and I'm so thankful to him for accepting joining my channel today to talk about this case. So Ari sort of took me through the case and what actually happened and what didn't happen. You know, there's a lot of miscommunications and, you know, misinformation being spread online about what this case was and what it wasn't. So Ari kind of clears up what it was, what happened, what he thinks would have happened if the case had happened in North America versus in the UK, what Johnny could do, what he should have done, and that sort of thing. So I'm very excited to share today's interview with you. I'm sort of new to the whole Zoom thing, so you can't actually see my video unless I'm talking. I thought I had it so you could, but you can't. But that's okay. You don't have to see me. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed today's video with Ari. Make sure you let me know in the comment section below what you thought and what your thoughts are about this case going forward. And yeah, let's get into the segment. My first question for you is so there's been so much on social media about the Johnny Depp situation, and I just feel like so many people don't understand what the case was and what the case wasn't. So can you just explain to me what actually happened here?
Sure.
Versus what didn't happen that people seem to think did happen.
Sure. The Johnny Depp case is one where they think it's Johnny Depp against Amber Heard. If you'll recall, Johnny Depp, the star of the Pirates of the Caribbean and Fantastic Beasts, because that will come into this discussion, married Amber Heard years after meeting her on the Rum Diary. They had a very, very turbulent, often violent relationship. There's no dispute as to that. But the newspaper in England, and this is the key, wrote a headline that called him a wife beater and said essentially, how can he be kept on the movie Fantastic Beasts? But the title of the headline was, he's a wife beater. So he sued the newspaper. He did not sue Amber Heard. He sued the newspaper. And because of defamation laws in England, which are different than, for example, in the United States, Johnny Depp had a lengthy trial in the court in London through the summer. The decision was just released recently, which essentially probably put a huge nail in the coffin of Johnny Depp's career, finding that, and this is as simple as it gets, that because what the newspaper wrote in the title, wife beater, was shown to be true, more likely than not true, that Johnny Depp essentially lost, the newspaper won, and now Johnny Depp is in even further career damage control, both in the studio system, but also in terms of further lawsuits that he's brought in America because of this exact same kind of allegation.
So essentially, in this particular case, it didn't matter if Amber ever abused him. It only ever mattered if he ever hit her back.
Well, okay. What's interesting about this is that the judge, and one of the great adages that I've always lived with is, doesn't matter what the law is. Don't tell me what the law is. Tell me who the judge is. And in this case, the judge, in hearing from Amber Heard, Johnny Depp, and a significant number of other witnesses, that's again going to be part of our discussion. The judge essentially said, I don't care what the other evidence shows. I believe Amber Heard, and sort of ignored the other witnesses. We'll get into a really interesting piece of evidence if you'd like on that, but the judge essentially said, I believe Amber Heard. I believe her recitations of what Johnny Depp did. And on 12 of 14 separate allegations, here's what most people don't know. There were 14 separate allegations of violent conduct on Johnny Depp's behalf. 14. The judge believed Amber Heard on 12 of them, and on the other two, the reason the judge didn't find that they were substantially true is because Johnny Depp was not cross-examined or asked questions about them. And there's an ancient rule in our legal system that you have to at least give the person an opportunity to be asked and answered about it. So it really probably would have been 14 of 14, but 12 of 14 certainly helped Amber Heard. And remember, for those who don't know the court system that well, all the newspaper had to show is one of those 14 to be Johnny Depp assaulting or being violent with Amber Heard, and that would have gotten the newspaper the success that they obviously enjoy today.
Okay, so they found, that's so weird then. So what would you say that this decision was mainly because of what the judge decided to go with Amber Heard? Like, do you think if this case had been handled in Canada or in the US and they ended up with a different judge, do you think it would have turned out differently?
Well, let's look at the differences between England and the US, for example. The US is much more concerned with freedom of expression. It would have been much harder for somebody suing, for example, the Washington Post, which is what Johnny Depp is doing, to get anywhere. In England, and you may remember there's all sorts of phone hacking scandals and Hugh Grant and Princess Diana. When you go to court on a defamation, libel, slander case in England, the presumption is essentially that what the newspaper wrote is false. And the newspaper is then behind the 8 ball having to show why it's not false and in fact why they got it right. Now in America, it's totally different. You have to, as the plaintiff, as the person suing, you are presumed to be in a much tougher legal fight. You have to show why it's false. It's presumed that the newspaper, the publisher, the Twitter, the organizer, well, Twitter's not a publisher, that's a different conversation for a different day, but it's a much harder road to hoe in America versus in England. And it was accepted by all the lawyers in England, for those who know who Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is, and this is a part of the story, it was accepted that if that allegation of wife beater, that's the term, if that wasn't true, all the lawyers agreed that there would be huge, huge damages to Johnny Depp because it could help kill his career. And that wasn't part of the legal story in England. Part of the legal story in England was the newspaper called Amber Heard and a bunch of other people to show that what they wrote was true. Johnny Depp called a bunch of evidence, including witnesses of some of these events, to say they're fictitious, they didn't happen. And in fact, he had a tape recording of Amber Heard bragging essentially about punching Johnny Depp, assaulting Johnny Depp, being rough with Johnny Depp. I'm paraphrasing, but many people might have seen it on mainstream news. And Amber Heard was acknowledging how violent she was with him and calling him a bunch of names that I'm not going to repeat here, but suffice to say that didn't suggest that he's a strong man. And the judge, in an extraordinarily weird piece of legal reasoning, said, well, because Amber Heard was saying these things on tape, she wasn't under oath. Now think about that for a second. You're in a fight with your husband. You don't know that you're being recorded. The judge said, because she's not under oath, I prefer her evidence in the courtroom where she's being sworn to tell the truth, where she explains away these videotapes. As a lawyer, I always think the evidence of something caught right in the moment, right at the scene, whether it's on YouTube, video, or audio, tends to suggest a little bit more truthfulness than, in my view, going into a courtroom where people don't take their oaths all that seriously, particularly when their career, both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, were on the line. So it's a very, very bizarre part of the judge's decision. And if we were looking at a criminal standard, which for everybody watching this in Canada, if there was a criminal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, there's no way we'd have the same result. But in libel cases or civil cases, it's more of what's called a balance of probabilities, which is essentially more likely than not, or 50% plus one.
So the hardest thing for me about this is that as a woman, my usual default with these sorts of cases is to believe the female, is to go with the victim. And in this case, Amber Heard makes it almost impossible to want to be on her side because there's so much evidence the other way. Do you think the way that the sort of social movements have gone recently helped Amber Heard in this case?
There is no doubt in my mind, whether it's a popular thing to say or an unpopular thing to say is sort of irrelevant to me. The idea that the Me Too movement isn't having an earth shattering effect on these kinds of cases, and by the way, much more seriously even than Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, on criminal cases. Judges now face tremendous pressure by all sorts of groups, even within the law, to look at cases with a little less scrutiny than they did before. I have seen, and there are numerous appeals that are going on over the last couple of years and will continue, about whether the standards have been lowered in terms of proof beyond a reasonable doubt in these kinds of cases. What your audience might not know, because they're not in the criminal justice system, is just how much easier Ottawa, Ottawa, the Trudeau government, Jody Wilson-Raybould when she was the justice minister, have made it to get easier convictions. Now think about this. Easier convictions on he said, she said. Now many people hearing that might celebrate it. They might say it's long overdue. They might say it's a rebalancing of the criminal justice system. On he said, she said, why shouldn't we believe the woman for proof beyond a reasonable doubt? And the answer I always give that makes people go, oh, I didn't think of it that way was, what if it's your brother or your father who was accused of something he said, she said? They had evidence that it didn't happen. They had text messages and other messages that showed that they were framed or set up. Now, not only do they run a risk of getting convicted in a much easier way, they're for sure going to get charged because police won't use discretion anymore, because police have essentially been told, just charge everybody and let the courts figure it out. And then, different than every other kind of case in Canada, if I have what are called exculpatory text messages, you and I go out on a date, you and I have some fun, you then regret it the next day, but you send me text messages telling me it was the best time you ever had, you wanted to do it, you were the instigator. I cannot use those now in court unless I show them to you and your defense lawyer. And now you have a lawyer. Now, if you understand why that's significant for people who like Law and Order or all the cop shows and A Few Good Men and all the good courtroom scenes we all love, everybody knows defense don't have to show their hand. Defense don't have to telegraph what they're doing. You'll all remember the John Gomeshi case, where the defense lawyer in that case made the three women look like the biggest liars on earth because they didn't know what was coming. Parliament has now said only in sexual assault cases, 99% with women, do we have to have the defense show all of their evidence to the Crown and the witness first. I'm putting it simply. But in every other kind of case in the criminal code, murder, drugs, kidnapping, child abuse, violent home invasions, that rule doesn't apply. But in sexual assault, the defense has to show their hand. So do I think in the Johnny Depp case, when a judge says, I'm going to ignore Johnny Depp's witnesses who come to court and say, this didn't happen, that didn't happen, Amber Heard is lying, or ignoring a recording where Amber Heard herself is detailing what she does to Johnny Depp, that to me is a problem. Now, it doesn't make me think that Johnny Depp wasn't violent. He is a drug-addicted, complete fiend. He's a drunk. He's a drug addict. There's an image of him painting a wall with his blood and going all over the place with a severed finger. Do I think he's as innocent as the day is long? No. But do I think that the infantilization of the criminal court process in Canada, or even in this civil proceeding in London, do I think the standard should be lowered because it's a woman testifying versus a man, or it's a woman caught on tape versus a man? I don't know how that's something anybody can get behind, but the Me Too movement says, quite simply, as we all know, believe all women. And that is not something as a criminal defense lawyer that I understand it all. We should believe all nobody. We should believe all nothing. And we should insist that anybody, black, white, orange, Jewish, Muslim, woman, transgender, male, white, black, it has nothing to do with what are called your immutable characteristics that you can't change. It all has to do with your evidence, your character, and a whole bunch of other things.
So then, do you think Johnny would be in the right in the future to pursue this, like, criminally against Amber, or like civil against Amber for defamation of character? Or do you think it'll just continue to be his cases that he's going to do against North American neighbors?
So here's where Johnny Depp's decisions lie. There's no criminal proceeding here because it's just, to me, it's too late for that. To my knowledge, nobody's gone to the police. There aren't going to be criminal charges. But in England, as a result of the case we're talking about, Johnny Depp, and many of your audience may have seen this, Johnny Depp says, I'm going to appeal it. He called the judge's decision bizarre and a couple other very interesting adjectives, but said, I'm going to appeal it, and please keep faith in me, and I appreciate your support. The problem is, I don't see a great ground of appeal here, because even if I'm arguing for him, and he had very good lawyers, I mean, he's Johnny Depp, although he's essentially bankrupted himself. She had a great lawyer. She had a very well-known free speech defamation lawyer, Amber Heard, on her own behalf. And the newspaper, of course, afforded a very good lawyer. Even if you make the argument that the judge got 3 of these incidents wrong, 5 of these incidents wrong, 9 of these incidents wrong, the one that was recorded that the judge goes, I've heard Amber, and I just think she was saying stuff on tape, but I'm not going to believe her, but I'll believe her in court. 11 instances wrong. All you had to do for the news of the world is have one of the 14 incidents be more likely than not to be supported, or on a balance of probabilities, to use a term. So an appeal here, to me, seems to be going nowhere. And remember, appeal courts give great deference. They give great deference to the discretion of a trial judge. And for people who don't know what I mean, a trial judge sits in the courtroom, sees the witnesses, smells them, touches them, sees their demeanor, sees their faces, see how they answer questions. An appeal court who's just looking at a transcript, not looking at like you and I talking live on Zoom or on YouTube, an appeal court gives great deference to a trial judge. So even on that front, appeals are extremely hard to win. And the second part of it, and the shorter part, is Johnny Depp has brought the same lawsuit against the Washington Post for exactly this sort of thing. But as I mentioned at the beginning, in the US, it's much more tailored to free speech. So if I'm Johnny Depp's lawyers, well, I'll go back a step. If I'm Johnny Depp, who may not have as much money left as we think he does, who's now being blank canned from the Fantastic Beasts franchise, which many of your audience would have seen the headline that as soon as this judgment was over, he was kicked off that project, even though he started filming it, even though J.K. Rowling came to his defense. If I'm Johnny Depp and I'm blanking away so much money on legal fees that I don't have enough money left for the wine addiction I have, I'm not appealing because that's extremely expensive. And I'm not continuing with my lawsuit against the Washington Post because that's going to lose as well, even though it's the US court's not bound to even look at the English court decision. That's a losing proposition. If I'm Johnny Depp, I take that 5, 10, 15, $20 million he's going to spend in legal fees and come up with a different way to resurrect and keep his career going.
So you don't think, like, so the American courts have no reason or no, like, legal obligation to look at the UK courts, but do you think they would affect it anyway? Like, do you think in the States he would still lose?
Oh, I think for sure in the States he will lose, and not only lose badly. He's also going against Jeff Bezos. And if you think about Jeff Bezos, there's nobody on the planet Earth, and if you believe in God, Jeff Bezos has more money than your God. So I don't see that going anywhere. And even if he was going against a local news station in the greater Toronto area, he'd have trouble. And when you look at US defamation and libel, it's much, much harder to bring those cases because the US, to their credit, or maybe discredit, depending on certain libelous things that are said about public figures, it is much harder to succeed on a defamation or libel suit in the US because of freedom of expression, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, etc., than it is in England. So Johnny Depp, if he enjoys wasting money and making lawyers very wealthy, and I'm never opposed to people who want to make lawyers wealthy, I'm a big fan of those people, but if Johnny Depp had any sense, he would stop the appeal immediately. He would stop the suit against the Washington Post because he's going to get killed on it and commit even further career suicide. By the way, he took a huge career suicide risk in bringing this lawsuit in London. I don't know who gave him great legal advice on it. You know, it's sort of like when people smear other people on Twitter. You either can respond to it and go bananas, or you can let it play out for a week, let the 600,000 retweets go where you're the story of the week, and then wait 3 days and Donald Trump will be the enemy again. So Johnny Depp...
I was going to ask you that too. Do you think he would have been better off to just leave it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So why you ask a great question is because it's very interesting to know how he pulled the trigger to bring this lawsuit. Who was giving him advice? Who was telling him to do this? Now, he might have thought, look, I've got recordings. I've got independent witnesses. But remember, he wasn't charged with a crime where the state would have to prove proof beyond a reasonable doubt. He knew this would be a headline story around the world. And remember, during COVID, this is all during COVID, there aren't that many interesting entertainment stories right now.
We're not doing anything else.
We're not doing anything else. We've got Trump fatigue. There's no new movies opening. So he was the story for a good part of July with this evidence every day. So the question really becomes, and if you know anything about Johnny Depp, and I won't get too boring here, he's claimed that he's lost $650 million to bad money managers. $650 million to bad money managers. And the reason I say that little detail, particularly for your audience at home who would love to have $6.5 million or $650,000 or $65,000 extra dollars or $6,500 extra dollars, is that Johnny Depp has a very bad habit of getting very bad advice. And my sense here is that whoever encouraged him to do this, with all the legal costs, and remember, he lost. He pays the other side's legal costs too. He pays the lawyers for the newspaper. Somebody has given him very bad advice. There are people in Hollywood who have been smeared with worse than wife beater. And in my view, he should never have brought this lawsuit. I don't say I sympathize or don't sympathize because I wasn't there, don't know the truth. I'm not the lawyer on the file, don't have the evidence. But this was probably a very, very unwise action on his part. I'm not sure even winning the lawsuit would have made that big of a difference to Me Too people who wouldn't have respected the decision of the lawsuit. Look at Jean Ghomeshi. He won. The judge called his three accusers the biggest liars since sliced bread, and Jean Ghomeshi cannot even have an article published. This is a man that in Canada was acquitted, and his accusers called liars, and most Canadians today don't even know he was acquitted, don't care he was acquitted, he was smeared. So in my view, what Johnny Depp has put himself through is, again, probably not the wisest choice he could ever have made.
Okay, that's funny that you say that because that's kind of what I thought. I mean, on one hand, someone has a right to defend himself if someone says something terrible about you. But on the other hand, at what point is it worth it, right? Just to drag it through the news again. So sort of one of the last things I wanted to ask you was the situation with Warner Brothers. If Johnny Depp still had money, do you think he was in the right stepping down from Fantastic Beasts? Do you think he could sort of like sue them? Because in realistically, he wasn't charged with a criminal case, right? It's just a libel case. So I feel like Warner Brothers, they've worked with worse people who have lost worse cases. Why Johnny, you know?
So here's the interesting way that Hollywood works. And if you ask, you ask another good question. So let me give you a very in the weeds answer to that about the way this works. Johnny Depp was on what's called a pay or play contract. What that means in Hollywood, whether it's Warner Brothers, Universal, 20th Century Fox, is he was going to get paid whether or not Fantastic Beasts, the sequel, was made. He could have slipped on a banana peel. He could have done 6 million, 1,200, 13 other things. He was going to get paid whether or not it got made. And in his contract, he did not, I emphasize, he did not have a morality clause. There are a lot of businesses, for example, in Canada, maybe, where I do a lot of media, where you do a lot of media, that have morals clauses that if the host goes out and drinks and drives, if the host is charged with a crime, if a reporter is swearing on camera at somebody that walks by, there's a morals clause that allows the boss, for a public figure, to get rid of that public figure. Now, why does that matter here? One, Johnny Depp didn't have that, but Warner Brothers said, we're firing you. He's still going to get paid for that. So there'd be nothing really to sue for. And it is Warner Brothers' prerogative, in my view, when a court in England, a proper court, even though the decision is strange, but a proper court says it is substantially true, or more likely than not, that you are a wife beater. So Warner Brothers, well within its right, sort of like Jeffrey Toobin at the New Yorker, who was caught Toobining during a Zoom call. These are things that are within employers' rights. So Johnny Depp has no action against Warner Brothers. He would if his contract wasn't fulfilled and they didn't pay his movie salary, which some people say is as high as $20 million. So that's the way that Hollywood works in his case. So he'd have no legal standing there.
And I believe Warner Brothers also do the Aquaman series.
That's right,
franchise.
Amber Heard.
Exactly. So do you think that, there's been a petition that already has over a million signatures to have her removed. Do you think they're going to keep her?
Well, let's think about that for a moment. It goes back to something you mentioned earlier. So Johnny Depp is gone because a court says it's more likely than not that he was violent and assaultive to Amber Heard, okay? And she had injuries, so let's accept for a second that the court was right. She was injured by a man. That's serious business. I'm very outspoken, even during the pandemic, about how domestic violence isn't taken seriously. All the women who are stuck in homes that can't go out and go somewhere else, and they can't call the cops on their husband or boyfriend or somebody because they have nowhere to go. This is a big problem in our society. But the flip side is, and again, I don't really care what people's views of Me Too are. It doesn't really matter to me for this purpose. Amber Heard is bragging on an audio tape that she has recorded on in her own voice, bragging about how she abuses Johnny Depp, hits him, throws pots and pans at him. She calls him a whole bunch of things on that tape. Her words, not doctored, not fake news. It would be very strange to me that she gets to stay on Aquaman because she's a woman, or we look at women differently or with a different standard. And again, this is my personal views. I don't care if you're a woman, man, transgender, black, white, Jewish, Muslim, totally irrelevant to me. We look at your actions. So do I think Warner Brothers will keep her? I don't know if it's Warner, but whoever it is. Do I think the producers of Aquaman will probably keep her on? Yes, because we live in such a crazy Twitter world that I think that they think that if we get rid of Amber Heard, you'll have Twitter go ballistic for a few days saying you're now victim shaming, victim blaming, and all of that. And Amber Heard, by the way, is no fool. She knows how to play this. She's known how to milk this. She's been very clever about this. I'm not saying what she says is true or untrue, but my sense is it's a complete double standard. It almost always is. And I'd be very surprised if she's kicked off of Aquaman.
Even with the petitions?
I don't think the petitions will make any difference. I think they'll be insulted and sort of viewed as if it's Rudy Giuliani doing the petitions to get rid of her. I think people will say it's right-wing or it's chauvinist or misogynist. It could be a women's group, and I just think Amber Heard's PR team will have a clever enough way to say Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump are behind them and they're to be laughed at. I don't think these petitions will get anywhere. I think Twitter runs the world, and even when there was a support Johnny Depp hashtag a week or two ago, it lasted about 4 hours. And that's the way these things go. So I don't think the petitions will make any difference. I think the noise of firing Amber Heard will probably be a bigger financial risk for the studio than not firing her.
Fair enough. And then just to bring us the sort of last thing that I wanted to ask you about was, had the case gone the other way, had Johnny won, do you think that would have had serious ramifications for newspapers in the UK and what they can and can't say about someone?
Yes, I think if he would have won, and if we would have had a judge look at things differently and say, I'm not convinced 50 plus one. I'm not ignoring the audio tape. I'm not ignoring Johnny Depp's witnesses. And think through, I mean, would Johnny Depp have brought this kind of action if it was so easy to prove that he did it? There's just something weird about that to me. If
That's
you
what I
know
thought
you've
too.
got skeletons in your closet, and you know that you're going up against lawyers who are skeleton finders, would you bring such an action? That's why the decision is still surprising to me. You know, if the judge said, look, I'm a third convinced, I'm a quarter convinced, I'm 42% convinced, that's fine. But if Johnny Depp would have succeeded, I think it would have had a big, big effect on things. I think it would have sent a message to others in the public eye that they shouldn't take crap about them lying down. I would say that that's why a lot of the libel cases in the last couple decades in London made a difference. The phone hacking scandal, one of them involving a child. Paul McCartney was involved in one of them, Hugh Grant, Princess Diana. These things make a difference. And right now, because of what happened to Johnny Depp, I think it'll be a free-for-all. People and publishers will know they can essentially say what they want so long as they have a witness that will say, this is my truth. And one of the big problems in our society is everybody thinks that my truth is the truth. And what you essentially had a judge doing in the Johnny Depp case is saying, I believe Amber Heard's truth. I'm going to ignore everything else that doesn't go to that truth. And that's, to me, and again, as a defense lawyer, that's a very difficult proposition, where I tend to think that when people put their hand up and swear on the Bible or affirm or whatever they do, they're doing it in the contemplation of litigation. It's very different than sitting in confessional if you're somebody who goes to confession and you're spilling your heart because it's the truth. I have my own skepticism about it, but there's no doubt that the fact that if Johnny Depp would have won, I think that would have had a significant impact on libel laws because everybody would have known about it. It's not some esoteric decision in the law chambers of, you know, British Columbia that nobody ever hears about.
And I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to cover. Is there anything else that you think is important to know about this case or the situation?
I think we've covered it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Ari, for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's like it's one of those things that I could research it myself, but it's so much easier to hear the story from a lawyer's point of view, right? And I think a lot of people agree with you that it doesn't, like, when you look at the evidence, like you said, I'm one of the people who usually believes the woman just flat because history hasn't believed women. You know what I mean? The men get off scot-free, but in this case, there's so much evidence against Amber Heard that it sort of doesn't make sense the way that it was ruled. But at the same time, like you said, all they had to do was prove one case where he hit her,
One of
and that's right. One case, and that makes him allowed to be called a wife beater. So yeah, that's really it. Thank you so much, Ari. I really appreciate you joining me.
Happy to do it anytime you want.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I will for sure be bugging you again in the future.
You're not bugging me.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.